All right. Welcome, everyone, to this year's Susquehanna Showdown. I am coming to you live from Susquehanna's office headquarter in beautiful Bala, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philly. We have a beautiful Saturday. With me is Maria Ho, esteemed poker player and commentator, who will join us to commentate on this year's Susquehanna Showdown final table. Welcome, Maria. Believe you are muted to start.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's not my first time, I promise. But it looks like we are getting a look at the players' positions with their chip stacks and also where they'll be seated at the table. So we do have a few minutes before we kick things off. I mean, Anders, why don't you run us through kind of, what are your thoughts? I remember you said you spoke to several of these players leading up to the final table. So what did you think the vibe was in the room? How are people feeling, especially now that, we're really talking about people wanting to make the money with the payouts and the structure as it is, which I believe will also throw up a graphic that shows those payouts. What do you think the energy in the room is like right now?
I think so. In the room right now, as you can see on your screen, there are a lot of people in the room. This was a tournament with players from all over the country who qualified through online qualifiers, and then the top 100 were invited to come play in this kind of showdown. 100 people playing down to a winner, one day tournament in Balakinwood. So you have 90 players who unfortunately, or 91 players who unfortunately did not, make our final table, but who are, sitting off to the side, maybe rooting on their friends, maybe getting to know a few fellow poker players. And then, of course, you have the 9 finalists who are, I think, a little bit nervous. I tried to go and say hi to most of them, just kind of get their thoughts on how they were feeling, and they were excited to get playing. They've battled through both the online qualifiers and the of course tournament today to get down to the top 9. So I think they feel like they have everything to win, as they should.
How do you feel like the transition for, online play to live play has been? I mean, I'm sure you know because you have experience playing both, but do you feel like sometimes the live setting can definitely be a little bit more nerve-wracking? So, if some of these players who qualified online, once they step into the live arena, it's a totally different ball game, right?
Absolutely, I think there's a wide range of experience levels. Certainly from the players um, who were here, the 100 that started, and certainly among the final 9. I think among the final 9, there's between 9 months to 4 years of prior kind of poker experience. So aside from just the live versus online, just a wide range of familiarity with the game. Live versus online, I think, you play online, maybe you played from your college dorm, late at night uh, after a long day at school. You definitely have the advantage of no bright lights, no cameras, and of course now when you play in person, there's the social aspect. There's making sure you don't give anything away with your body language, which obviously doesn't matter when you're playing online. So I don't know, the players that I got a chance to speak to, they seemed pretty comfortable. I think they might, maybe keep their cards close to the vest to start. Try to not give anything away. So maybe a prediction is that the play will start a little bit slower than it otherwise could, just as players feel out the live arena with the cameras and the lights. But I don't know. What do you think the players will think about in the first few levels?
Yeah, I feel like there's going to be a lot of, sussing out the situation. Again, when we're looking at the prize pool, first place is 10K and ninth place is 500. So there is, of course, a big difference between being the first person out and being the last person standing. And for that reason, I think we will see, like you said, play be a little bit slow in the beginning. We do have a very short stack in Matthew, as you could see from the graphic, with 3.7K in chips. And so it is a little bit of a waiting game. You are just trying to ladder, you are trying to survive in the beginning, trying to wait out these short stacks. the middling stacks are highly incentivized to stick around and to capture these pay jumps, right? So um, I think this is prime time for some of these big stacks like Aditya or somebody like David with 33K as the chip leader to really step up with the aggression, to really put a lot of pressure on these players because as I said, they're going to be in survival mode. So there's going to be a lot of folding. There's going to be a lot of easy blinds out there up for grabs. So you definitely want to see as a chip leader in this situation to not hold back, to really amp up the aggression until somebody starts playing back at you, which, I think will be a while before we will see somebody really try to fight back.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to make a quick shout out just to our first giveaway of the day. You can find details in the chat where you'll also find instructions of how to participate. The um, there will be a couple more throughout the show, so listen for clues coming from us, or keep an eye on the chat for further giveaways. But they will only be active for 5 minutes to try to make sure you are quick to check it out, jot a quick answer, shoot it off as per the submission to our campus email, and maybe you will be one of the lucky winners.
Yeah, I believe what is up for grabs is Susquehanna t-shirt and playing cards. This is not a t-shirt, but like I said, this is the merch that you might get some swag and stuff like that. So definitely want to be participating in these giveaways. And it looks like the players are taking their seats and getting settled in. Something that's really important before things start and before things kick off. I really feel like it's important to check your chip stack, right? A lot of times when we're coming into the final table with production involved, there's going to be people moving your chips. There's a lot of commotion. There's a lot of things going on. Sometimes the wrong chip stack gets placed in front of the wrong player. So something that I always like to do before the start of a final table, especially one that is being live streamed or televised, is check my stack. Make sure that I have the correct number of chips because there becomes a big problem once you start playing some pots. It's very hard to recreate stacks. And so you definitely don't want to be shortchanged in this situation. Every chip matters, every chip counts. So just a tip for those watching and, for these players, maybe when they run it back and watch this later, that would be something that's prudent to do.
Yeah, exactly. And we should note too that we have made a bit of an adjustment to the blind levels from when they were coming in. So players might be readjusting to thinking about how many big blinds they have. We want to get players as much time under the lights as possible. So we're going to start with blinds at 400, 800. And no antes, which, as you can tell, for some players like Matthew in seat 4, he's got 3.7K. That's not that many big blinds, 4 or 5, and so you gotta kind of take stock, realize how long are the blind levels, how much flexibility do I have, like you said, when you sit down, especially if it's a different environment than you're used to, which certainly this would be with cameras and a live stream, and 90 other prior participants still watching. You want to take stock of what the situation is right now, right? Like, what problem am I facing in this current situation? What are the circumstances? What are the blind levels? Who are my opponents? What are the chip stacks? Which I think our players have had 15, 20 minutes to get ready for, and now they're nervously peeking around across the table to see who they're up against, and we wish them the best of luck, as cards should be in the air here shortly.
Yeah, and a big part of final table strategy, right? Once we're talking about something like ICM being involved, independent chip model with, you know, understanding and trying to realize your equity in these spots and the real money value that is up for grabs, you really have to be aware of not just your own stack, but everybody else's stack. So to your point, it's just about looking to see what are other players playing? So you might be looking at yourself and saying, oh, I'm the short stack. I might be the first one out. But really, who is the second shortest stack? where do the blinds start? Are they going to get the big blind twice before you do, depending on where the button is? So these are all really important things that you want to pay attention to. And it will definitely influence the way that you approach the final table. It's going to influence the way that you are going to maneuver at this point, whether you are a short stack or a big stack. It's going to make a difference to pay attention. And I think that's also a difference between online and live, right? Because online, you see everybody's chip stack written out very nice and neat. But in a live scenario, sure, at the start, you might know everybody's chip stacks because we have it all recorded and things like that. But once play starts and chips start changing hands, you are the one who has to be keeping track and counting down other player stacks and eyeballing and guesstimating. And so again, that's just all a part of the fluid strategy of live poker, is that you don't have access to all of these numbers at your fingertips. Unfortunately, like trading and the things that you guys do over there, Andres, it's not really going to always be that visual or that visible to you. You really have to constantly be adapting and adjusting to some of these different numbers, which in some ways I think is maybe similar to what you guys do as well. It's kind of interpreting and reanalyzing new information as it comes in.
Yeah, I appreciate the segue. Here at Susquehanna, we trade anything and everything. These players, of course, today have been mostly focused on their poker, but they've also been learning about the firm and what we do at Susquehanna. And so, like you said, in the markets, we always have to balance between what is the sort of theoretically optimal, correct thing to do, and where can I, in certain circumstances, deviate from that because I think that there's some inefficiency in the market that I can, you know, monetarily use to my advantage. So that has a lot of the same talking points as poker. So we are always excited to meet young, strategic thinking people like the players in our poker tournaments, and of course across the country who had the chance to qualify for this tournament and hopefully took advantage. And if anything, they've learned a little bit about us and what we do as a firm.
Yeah, certainly it sounds like there's just a lot of transferable skill sets, of course, between what you guys do at Susquehanna and poker. And I feel like this is kind of why a poker tournament is the perfect way to be, casual and social in some regards, but also for them to show kind of that they do have the skill sets needed, or that they're able to maybe hone or practice them at the poker table, for something like one of these real life scenarios that they might face in a future career, or um, in a future even hobby, because there's a lot of people that now trade um, at home, retail traders, people that are doing it for fun, right? And so I think that that's very interesting that this is kind of a way for them to connect those dots. And it sounds to me like what you were saying about um, some of the similarities is the game theory optimal play that we talk about in poker versus exploitative, right? So there's these deviations that you guys make, and that's kind of the secret sauce maybe of a trader as well.
Yeah, exactly. I'll just pivot a little bit now that we see blinds posted here, 400, 800. I believe it looks like the button is going to be in seat 5. For those of you who maybe did not join the stream at the start, I just want to reintroduce myself. My name is Anders. I am a 6-year trader at the firm. I work on the block institutional block options trading desk. So I make markets in larger sizes, larger clips for institutional customers that want to trade more size than might be available in the electronic markets. Before that, I was a market maker in single stock options at the firm. And we are hosting this year, similar to last year, a large tournament where we invite players from across the country who have qualified not only prior to today in online tournaments, but also today they played down from 100 players down to a final 9 where we see plays just getting going. And with me as co-commentator, I have poker player and commentator Maria Ho.
Hi, thanks for having me. It does look like things are getting underway, and we'll very shortly be introducing these players that you see, the final nine, and talk a little bit about, where they come from, kind of their interests, maybe outside of poker, and also talk about their chip stacks, maybe kind of allude to the type of strategy we might be seeing here at the final table as we get things underway here.
Yeah, like you said, as players get involved in hands, we'll try to introduce them. It seems like now to start, we have a few players making sure they put their cards on top of the card readers. For those of you who may have maybe have not seen a live stream before, the technology involved has sort of small chips in the cards that placed on certain places on the felt get read and fed to us up in sort of separate studios to see them with a certain delay so that there's no information kind of shared with the players in real time. So we have a lot of folds here to start the first hand. We got Matthew with, like we said, small stack to start us off. Look down at King Queen offsuit in the cutoff, and like we said, maybe a little bit timid to start. Marcus, on the other hand, on the button, looks down at the King 8 and puts all of it on the line to try to win some blinds, and it looks like he's successful here with small and big blind quickly getting out of the way.
And that's just a part of, I think, poker people sometimes it takes a while for them to realize is it's really not about the cards, right? It's about playing the players. You don't necessarily always have to have a good hand or the best hand in order to win. As we take a look at the payouts, as I mentioned a little earlier, first place is 10K. I mean, that is going to go a long way for these college students. I think that, again, we're talking about pay jumps with ninth place being 500. There is just so much incentive for these players to wait out the shorter stacks. So I am hoping to see the big stacks really step up and be aggressive.
Absolutely. Obviously, like we said before, you start out, you see a lot of players maybe taking it a little bit on the commerce side, um, and yeah, a lot of quick folds. We always appreciate speedy play. The faster things play, the more hands you get to see, the more fun you get to have. The more situations you get to encounter. Uh, got an interesting small blind versus big blind situation here, where Jesse from MIT decides to, it looks like, put in a small raise here. Chinmay in the big blind looks like he's sticking around for a call. A7 versus Queen 6, typical small blind versus big blind hand. First flop we get to see today.
Yeah, and remember, because they are in the blinds and these are forced bets, it's really just these two random hands that are trying to battle it out when it's folded to them. And, Jessie has an above average hand for being in the small blind. And it looks like she is going to bet here. And the Queen Six is going to get out of the way. It just did not connect whatsoever with that flop. And like to see Jessie pulling in some chips.
Yeah, certainly. I believe she's coming in with one of the bigger stacks as well, with 24, 25,000 around there. Chinmay, one of those maybe medium stacks, something like third or fourth in chips. Definitely does not want to get into a big pot when, like we said, those payouts are quite steep. 10,000 for first and 500 for ninth. You don't want to make a misstep this early.
Yeah, and even though we can't hear table audio, it doesn't appear as though these players are really talking much. They're not really interacting with one another. And again, that could be a function of the fact that they might just be a little bit nervous. They're just trying to get settled in. But poker is such a social game. And not only that, there's definitely live reads that can be gained from getting your opponents to talk, getting the players in a chatty mood, getting them relaxed. So I definitely always advise, if you're good at it, if you're good at the speech play, you know, feel free to talk and chat it up with your opponents even before the hands start and during the hand, because you want to establish this baseline and kind of see how they behave when they're comfortable, so that you could see when they're uncomfortable what what deviations they make in their behavior that could perhaps give you some insight into the strength or weakness of the hand that they're holding.
Yeah, exactly. And presumably a few of these players got a little bit of time with each other on the prior tables they were at before we got to uh, a final table that was live streamed. So they probably have some familiarity, and now maybe under the lights and with the cameras they button up a little bit and keep it a little tighter. We didn't get to note the previous hand, but Chinmay, who's wearing a Penn sweater from Pennsylvania, just like Susquehanna, decided to put in a bit of a maybe an interesting play with the King Four racing all in over David's initial race, which definitely is sort of showing that he's willing to put the chips on the line. Maybe thinking that if other players are trying to make those pay jumps, it's a good time to maybe get a little aggressive and try to accumulate some more chips if the play is pretty slow to start.
Yeah, it looks like David's going to take this pot down with ace queen suited with the raise and just gets folds all around. Pretty hands, definitely one of the top tier starting hands.
Exactly. David, who goes to Syracuse, originally from Port Chester, New York, has played poker for about a year. He's got a good chip stack here to work with to start the final table. And I don't know, so far we've had a few maybe interesting hands that could have gone more aggressive, but overall things have progressed kind of I don't know, maybe as anticipated, a little bit slower, but overall a sort of moderate amount of action.
Yeah, now
As I say, go ahead.
I was going to say, but this looks like the action is going to get a little bit pumped up here with the raise coming in to 1.6K from Jesse with ace king and the 3-bet from Chinmay with 10. So these are very strong starting hands, and they definitely have enough chips to continue post flop. But Jesse with ace king and 30 big blinds is really in the territory where I feel like I would be happy to shove hijack versus cutoff with this hand with that chip stack. He does have Chinmay covered, so 20 big blinds effective is what we're playing. The effective stack being the player who will be at risk in this situation, which is Chinmay. And it looks like Jesse is just going to call. That's certainly an option as well, but I think sometimes the problem becomes when you do just call, you whiff this flop of Jack 8-5, right? And you just kind of have to check fold. Whereas if you decide to go all in pre-flop, a couple good things can happen. Sometimes the player will have 3-bet a hand that they can't call off with, and they will fold, and you will win the chips in the pot. But it also gives you the betting lead post-flop, which again, on that Jack high flop, we know that Chinmay had tens. Maybe with some heavy betting post flop, maybe the tens would have decided to fold with an overcard out there with, perhaps, a re-raise from Jesse. So I do think that there are certainly a few ways she could have approached that hand. Certainly a call is fine, but definitely some other options on the table in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, this is one of those kind of situations that you have to be aware of the circumstances and the blind levels and the chip stacks of everyone else, because you'd love to have the betting lead with a hand like Ace King, but at the same time, when you only play 20, 25 big blinds effective, I think the only betting lead you're going to have is if you go all in. When you play a cash game, which some of our viewers may be familiar with, oftentimes, let's say at a casino, the blinds are $1, $2. A lot of players, they play with $200 or $300 in their chip stack. That is what we would say you have 100 or 150 big blinds to play with. Whereas here, of course, the big blind is 800, and the chip stacks in that instance were 20,000 or so, which means that there's a lot less that can happen with regards to 4-bets and sort of further post flop play. But but yeah, tens take it down, and we move on. A couple of interesting hands here with Chinmay staying active, racing it up with a king nine suited from +3. Certainly a hand that in a cash game you'd expect to play. I think in a tournament, maybe some players would have let this hand go. I think Chinmay has shown that he's a bit more on the aggressive side, and he's going to get the other players to fold behind to the big blind, who looks down at what? Jack 7. Not quite enough to put in the rest of Matthew's stack. So he's now dwindled down to, is it 2,900 after the big blind? So it's getting into a tough territory where the blinds are about to go up, and you know, um, he's gonna have to make a move or hope that someone else, gets unlucky and gets knocked out, so that he can maybe jump up from that $500 ninth place payout to the eighth place 750.
Yeah, and I mean, if the viewers out there had maybe the under on one orbit for Matthew to be out, he might be proving you guys wrong. I would have thought that with about 3.5 big blinds, he would have maybe found a hand that he needed to go with already, but certainly in the danger zone. So definitely at the mercy of the cards, which is kind of why it's problematic. I think if you're a player that finds yourself playing quite passively, then you might find yourself in situations leading into final tables or to the really important stages of tournament play with a short stack. And with a short stack, you're not able to utilize certain aspects of the game that would really benefit you, right? Like your bluffing ability goes down, the utility of your stack as a whole is just not as it's just not as serviceable as it was when you first start really deep, or maybe if you had chips towards the middle stages of the tournament. So what you really want to be doing is kind of protecting your ability to maneuver well, because now when you do have a 3.5 big blind stack, you are really just waiting for a good hand, right? You just really have no other moves. You have nothing in your arsenal that allows you to take down pots, because even the big blind is almost priced in to call you with any two if you shove.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I think we have you know, kind of maybe connecting it back to trading again, that in trading you want to be able to be in situations where you can leverage kind of your advantage. And to your point, in poker, when you start to have a really small stack, when your options get really limited, it becomes really difficult for you to, you know, basically make a better decision than someone else would have in your shoes, right? Which is kind of what you hope to do as a trader or as a poker player, that you somehow make better decisions than your competitors or than your opponents. And once you get down to a situation where the game tree gets really, really simplified, it's obviously a lot easier for other people in general to solve the game tree. And so it's harder to kind of feel like you have an edge in the game or in the markets. All right, blinds are still 4-8. I believe they're about to go up. We're playing 15 minutes levels to start, so players have had a chance to um, get their feet wet, play a couple of hands. Everyone hasn't been involved yet, but of course, this is hand 10. We've got a long way to go, and it's really hard to play if you really aren't getting a lot of good hands. So naturally, we do see a lot of players getting rid of their trash hands, so to speak. I'll be here with a real decision, facing a very early position raise from Chinmay, who's been active. So if you're in Abi's shoes here, what do you think about when you see Chinmay raise again, having been involved in already 5 hands?
Yeah, I mean, I would do exactly what Avi is doing, which looks like he's going to go all in for his remaining 7K. I mean, ace queen suited, just a beautiful hand, the type of hand that you want to see all five with, right? Because you get to try to make a big pair or flushes or straights. There's certainly a lot of options, with the types of hand you can make with a suited hand, with a connected hand that has two big cards. And so you are going to be in a position, if you move all in and get called, where you will see all five and try to realize your equity. So back to Chin Mei, though, 8-6 of diamonds, not a great hand, right? And this is kind of the problem where I love the aggression. I love that he chose to open in early position with a hand like this that is somewhat playable post, but now, you're faced against an all in. You're not necessarily quite priced in. You do have one of those hands where you feel like, okay, I mean, it's 5.4 to call 15K now in the middle. He does make the call, but you also have to think about, how does that affect your stack? The seven big blinds being, a fair percentage of his entire stack as well. But it looks like we're going to see the run out.
We are tough, stressful spot for Abby, of course. Player all in and at risk. Could double up his chip stack, but a 6 or an 8 here on the river, and he gets sent packing as the first player out. But he does survive on the 4 of diamonds. Ace high is going to play, and Abby gets a couple more chips. He's been patient to start the final table. Goes to Purdue. He says he started playing poker his freshman year, which was in 2023. So a couple of years later, he is making a run for it here at the Susquehanna Showdown, picking up a big pot. I want to say our first pot that got the Showdown here, 10 hands in.
Yeah, and I think that a few players are not too happy to see Abby double up. Obviously, the short stacks were really hoping that that was their opportunity to ladder. And it's always kind of the awkward situation in poker where you just know that nobody else is rooting for you.
Yeah, it's it's kind of what makes the game fun, I think. There's this multiplayer game where the equilibrium, so to speak, the solution is really complex because it really depends on the assumptions you make. Are you assuming that someone else is playing in a certain way? Is everyone else making the same assumptions that you are? And how can kind of you put other players in tough situations? As we see here, Jesse and Chinmay maybe getting involved in another blind versus blind hand as it folds to them. Looks like Jesse is going to make a race, and Chinmay comes along for a call. So we see another blind versus blind popped. Jesse took down the last one with a bet on the flop. We'll see what happens this time.
Yeah, so both players brick this 6-3 deuce flop. 2 diamonds. I mean, king high still best here. But again, it's just one of those situations where, it goes check, check actually here on the flop. I do think that this is kind of the spot where on the turn, once you see that your opponent checks twice, that maybe you want to start having some bluffs. But it does get checked to the river where Chinmay does connect with a pair of 10s, which looks like he's going to happily go for value here now after it's been checked all the way to the river.
He decides against it.
Yeah. Reached for chips, faked me out a little bit, and then decided to check back the top pair.
Seems like no harm, no foul, maybe. I gotta think that that Jesse, with only the king high, is not that interested in keeping, in putting extra chips in. But yeah, Chinmay taking down another pot. One of our more active players early on. Of course, took a hit versus Abby in the earlier hand, but Abby gets an interesting spot here with the ace-8 first to act. Could go either way. I mean, the table has played a little bit snug, maybe with the exception of Chinmay. So, what are you thinking about when you're in the stage where the table seems kind of maybe a little bit timid, but at the same time there are maybe 1 or 2 players who have been a little bit active. How do you approach that?
Yeah, it's definitely one of those borderline type of opens. Ace 10, ace jack plus, certainly going to open for first position. But this is where, like you said, you're going to start kind of thinking about other factors that might influence your decision. So now you're going to go from, what is maybe sometimes going to be an obvious fold to, okay, based on how the other players have been playing, based on what stage we're at, based on the fact that nobody has been eliminated from this final table yet. And so the passive play might continue for a while. do I want to start opening a little bit wider, take those hands that are just 1 or 2 pips down from what I'm supposed to be opening, you know, and decide to include that in my opening range because, again, the players might not be playing back, the blinds might not be defending quite as wide. So, certainly considerations to be made.
Yeah, we see Matthew here maybe making a comment that he does not have very many chips left. He's going to have to find a way to maybe double up once or twice, get back in the mix. But for now, we still have our 9 players. Everyone is still in the running for the $10,000 first prize. We didn't get a chance to mention, but Aditya came in from goes to school at Cornell, studies math, came in and raced with the King 10 suited, got a couple of quick folds, and takes down his first pot. And it's nice to see, you've been disciplined, you've been folding, the first 11, 12 hands of the day, and then you get a nice hand, and you get to pick up the blinds, and that's a good feeling. You feel like you were rewarded for your patience. You didn't get 3-bet immediately and had to fold, but you're kind of staying in the mix, being disciplined, and that ends up with a good result for Aditya. Here we see two of the same hand here, ace-9, of course, offsuit versus suited, with another player making their first appearance. Really, Yuamin racing from first position, and Abi feeling like when Yuamin raced from first position, ace-9 is it's a good hand, but maybe not quite good enough for Abi to continue from the big blind.
Yeah, I think the fact that it's suited might be what tips it over the edge to make it kind of a defend there. But of course, again, when we're thinking about these players being a little bit in survival mode and not necessarily wanting to play out of position against an early position opener, you can see why maybe they elected to fold in that spot.
Here we see Matthew. He's been waiting patiently. Of course, his chip stack has paid the blinds, I think once already. So he's down to 2,500 in chips, and he decides that ace queen is good enough, puts it in from early position. So if we have any Matthew fans at home, Abi might get out of the way, but Yuamin, depending on what he looks down to, he might feel like it's not that much more to call. Blinds are up to 500, 1,000. You only have to put in 1,500 more into a pot that's going to be 5,500. So Yuamin looks down at the queen 8, plays against the ace queen, and Matthew has got to be pretty happy here.
Yeah, in a lot of situations, the big blind is going to have 2 live cards against Matthew, right? But here, actually, Matthew is in a dominating position, just needs to fade 3 outs of the 3 remaining 8s in the deck. So far, so good as the board pairs with the deuce. And let's see what the river brings. An ace, and Matthew gonna double up with aces and deuces with a queen kicker here. And sometimes it works out that way. I feel like you think that when you're on a short stack, maybe you are not as optimistic that you're going to be able to get a pretty good hand in time before your blinds are just dwindled down to nothing. But there's some life here, and when you look at these stacks now, Matthew is no longer the shortest stack after that double up. He's actually the second shortest now, moving Raymond down to the bottom of the chip counts with 4.3 big blinds. So again, within the span of one hand, the mentality will shift a little bit because Matthew knew that everybody was waiting him now, and now Matthew's actually going to try to wait Raymond out. So just, just a little bit of hope.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of hope there.
Always fun, this kind of anticipation where you look around the table and there's $10,000 for first place. Ninth is only 500. You really want to kind of try to ladder up, as we say, right? You want to try to see if you can outlast other players, even if you don't necessarily make hands. Maybe if you fold, 5, 10 hands, other people might get eliminated. So far, that hasn't happened today. We've had 2 all-ins in the first 10, 15 hands, and the short stack has doubled up both times. So, we will see what happens. I'm sure that's going to have to change at some point, but for now, we've sort of kept it fun for everyone watching at home. Everyone's favorite player is still in.
Yep. So if you are anybody's mom or dad watching the stream, they're still here and they're still having a good time and hanging around. And we can't hear table audio, but if we did, I'm sure somebody would have a "Hey mom" shout out.
Absolutely, you have to think so. We saw Matthew actually making a bit of an emotional, I think, fist pump earlier when he hit that ace on the river to um, to confirm, that he was staying alive with the ace queen. So, it seems like the table has loosened up a little bit. We've seen maybe some smiles, a little bit of table talk here and there, but players, of course, still realizing that there is a lot left to play. As we see here, Abi, of course, picking up the two kings, the Cowboys, and probably gonna think about it for a few seconds. He doesn't want to give anything away by immediately going all in and showing that there was nothing to think about. But I have to think that he's just going to decide to maybe raise small. But of course, when you only have 14,000 left, he decides to just announce all in and put all the chips into the middle here.
Yeah, wow. And, given that Abi moved all in from the cutoff, Human definitely has a decision here on the button with ace 10 with just about 11 big blinds. These are late positions that we're talking about. So certainly ace 10 looks a lot more attractive when it's the cutoff moving all in versus facing an under the gun all in. So now it makes ace 10 much more of a decision if, it wasn't otherwise. It is now. You could see the deliberation and the time that he's taking to think about it. And it is kind of unfortunate because you don't expect the cutoff again to wake up with a hand as big as kings. And also when they open shove versus kind of the other option that you mentioned, Andres, about maybe raising instead of just shoving, open shoving actually makes their hand feel a little weaker than a hand that they're going to open with. So it almost looks like they are just trying to close out the action when they move all in. There's going to be worse aces. Any of those suited wheelie aces certainly could be hands that would go all in. So ace deuce, ace three, ace four, ace five suited might be moving all in as well, which ace 10 has beat. So you can see why Yumin makes this call, because a lot of times your opponent's not going to wake up with kings here. They might have, hands like king, queen suited, or, again, the hands that are small pairs as well that you're actually doing pretty well against because you'll be flipping with ace 10 against those hands. Kings is just really unlucky, I think, for Yumin to be up against such a big hand, but does have 3 outs here. Needs to hit an ace.
Yeah, oof. Ace on the flop. Yeah, Yuamin, I think, who was slightly shorter stacked than Abi after Abi, of course, had that double up with ace king. Oh my goodness, ace queen. I apologize. King on the
Wow.
turn.
2
And
outs hits on the turn and the queen on the river.
that is going to seal the fate. I think we're going to see a traditional applause like we do at Susquehanna here, even in the annual just company-wide poker tournament. We like to give the eliminated players a round of applause, thank them for playing, and of course showing respect around the table. Yuamin, decided to put the ace 10 on the line, and unfortunately that renders him out in 9th place here. Of course, a very, very tough turn card to see when you think you're in the lead so far, and then the king comes on the turn to put Yuamin out in 9th for 500. Of course, the next pay jump is now 750, and of course all the way up to 10,000 for first. So Matthew and Raymond, sitting on just 4.5 big blinds each, 4 or 5,000. They're gonna feel pretty fortunate that they were not the one who was forced all in, but instead they climb up the ladder. They have a stay alive to win a higher price. So
I mean, you guys are much more civilized over at Susquehanna because in poker tournaments, we don't clap when somebody gets eliminated from the final table. Most of the time, people are just too excited celebrating the fact that they just knocked somebody out. They're like fist pumping. They're like going over to the rail. They're riling up their friends. So I can appreciate this applause that people are getting when they get eliminated. You want to feel like these players were happy to have you there.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I'll note quickly here that Matthew, when it folds to him in the small blind, he looks down at a king and he decides, what, this is going to be good enough from second to last position. Most of the time, Marcus is going to have a worse hand, but unfortunately, Matthew's going to run into to Marcus's ace 10 here. So another all in and a call with a short stack at risk once again. However, very spicy flop here. Of course, Matthew flops a pair with an eight, makes two pair on the turn, but is still very liable to be knocked out on a club or a queen here.
Oh,
And the queen is gonna
it
come to knock
feels like
Matthew out.
it feels like you curse them. It's the commentator's curse. You're like, oh, they just need a club or a queen, and then the queen appears on the river. So I think that one's your fault, Anders.
I will say that Matthew has done a very good job to stay alive, outlast Yuamin to come into eighth place. So hopefully not too much bad blood. Matthew, who is computer science major at Princeton, doesn't have that far of a trip back after the tournament wraps up, but he'll probably want to stick around and follow his newfound friends to see who's going to take down that $10,000 first prize. Two quick eliminations in succession here. The other player is probably starting to look over at the payout table. I believe the next payout for seventh place is $1,000. So now the money is starting to get serious, and of course, you're gonna want to look around and figure out who is gonna want to play for it all, and who might play a little bit more slowly. We also see that the blinds are up here in hand 18. They're up to 600, 1200. So no rest for the wicked. We are moving ahead at a speedy clip. Two players out, and of course, seven left to go.
I mean, I know there's inflation and all, but I feel like if I were in college and I had $1,000, there's so many things I would go and do with that $1,000. I mean, to be honest, some of these people might just take that and go play at their local card room or casino with it.
You know, it's certainly
Run
what
it
I was
up.
doing when I was in college. You know, you gotta try to spin it up.
Yeah, we're giving them the start of a little poker bankroll here.
Exactly. Man, a lot of people trying to take their spots now. Two players out, and Marcus does not let off the gas. He just won with the ace queen, or I'm sorry, ace 10, and decides to put the queen queen suited to the test from the small blind. Gets called after a small deliberation here from Chinmay with the ace 9, who is just slightly ahead on your screen. You'll see 55-45 with the higher card, the ace, slightly ahead.
Yeah, I feel like card distribution kind of really putting these players in inevitable situations where we're just seeing a flurry of all in so far. Ace high still ahead. And it looks
It's
like ace is going to hold here with ace 9. And I believe the ace 9 was at risk, right? So it's a full double up here.
I
Or
think
no,
Marcus had
Marcus?
the king
Okay,
queen,
gotcha.
so he's gonna go out in seventh for $1,000, and just like that, I think in almost back-to-back hands here, maybe even back-to-back, we are only down to six players remaining. Of course, they still have a lot of chips. They don't necessarily want to risk in one go, so play might slow down now a little bit with chips starting to accumulate atop the standings. Chinmay with that ace 9 win over Marcus goes up to the top of the standings, and of course Marcus out in seventh with now the sixth place finisher poised to collect $1,250, which
And
of
you know
course
who's
it's far away from first. Go ahead.
Yeah, and you know who's really happy about that is Raymond sitting on 3.6 big blinds. Happy to see three people eliminated, and they didn't even have to do anything. They didn't do any of the dirty work. They just watched other people eliminate these players while they sat back and collected the money. And, I think that's the interesting part as well of poker strategy and ICM strategy and things like that is, when you get to this point, there's actually a benefit to staying out of trouble. You don't always need to be in the action. Sometimes you make more money in poker by folding. And I don't know, Anders, if there's maybe a parallel to trading that you can make there, but it's a very interesting concept that people might not understand. I think people feel like, oh, you have to be in the action, you have to play, you have to force the action sometimes instead of being patient. But actually you can make more money by folding, as demonstrated in this situation from Raymond just capturing these pay jumps. So again, I don't know if there's maybe some type of comparison to be made here with what you guys do, Anders, but the whole sitting back and just maybe waiting um, is not something that people are used to.
Yeah, I mean, I think just in general, when you're in the markets, people talk about how, of course, day trading is not advised because the average day trader, loses money. Oftentimes, that's simply because they're too active, right? They're crossing the spread one too many times, and so relative to someone who is maybe doesn't even have a strategy, but they just have some position that they don't trade in and out of as much, they're not going to be crossing the spread as much, and so that can often, be a part of that. That if you have a solid strategy that, of course, makes money, you can be trading actively, but if you don't, you're better off, like you said, maybe sitting back, taking stock of where you are, and trying to kind of outlast the other people who are too active. Of course, so far, like you said, card distribution, you used the term, basically indicating that the way the cards have fallen have led to a lot of all-ins. We see the same thing here where Raymond looks down at the ace four and he decides, what, this is going to be good enough. He puts it in and unfortunately run into Jesse's uh, ace 10 with the 10 kicker gonna play here. So we get another quick elimination with Raymond going out in sixth place for 1250, which he was the shortest stack. You got a feel for him, but like you said, at the same time, I believe he was the shortest stack already when we had 9 players left. So can't be too upset when you actually cash out for 1250 instead of 500.
Yeah, now the next person out will take home 1500. So again, these players are, of course, thinking about the fact that they want to survive, but also now kind of getting to the point where when you look at the stack sizes, no clear short stack in the mix anymore, right? So there's not really so much of this waiting out. You really want to maybe take this time to start playing a little bit more hands, being a little bit more active, and trying to create some separation from the other players. So starting to emerge as more of a runaway chip leader situation versus having all of these chip stacks kind of so close together. It doesn't really allow for any player to necessarily step up and, you know, influence the action.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that when we see, our first, I think, um, three-handed three-handed hand going to the flop here with play left to act, where Aditya puts in the raise from early position, gets a call from both the small and the big blind. And then we see check, check, check on the flop where all 3 players, feeling like they have chips to play with now, feeling like they have a little bit of room, decide to get involved. We should note that, pay jump wise, before it was 500, 750, 1,000, 1,250. Now fifth is going to collect 1,500, so they're guaranteed 1,500 each. But of course, now the pay jump is not 250; it's a full $500 pay jump up to fourth of 2,000, and of course, steeper from there to 3,000, 5,000, and 10,000 up top. So now it almost feels, as a counterpoint, maybe like you have to play even snugger because it matters even more if you advanced one spot. So we see a pretty passive play here from all 3 players. They check down, and then Aditya, with this ace on the river, maybe tries to bet with the king high, which happens to be the best hand. But seeing that ace, seeing a lot of passive play from his opponents. You mentioned before, if you see your opponents acting passively, that might be a sign that it's time for you to get aggressive and, like we see Aditya do in this case, put in a bluff and take the pot down.
Yeah, I get asked pretty often, from people who are just starting out and learning the game, what are a few tips that I could give them to someone who is just a complete novice. And one of the tips that I really like to share is do the opposite of what the rest of the players or the majority of the players at the table are doing, right? It doesn't really, I think sometimes in a social situation, it might, behoove people to get into this mindset like, oh, I just want to go with the flow. I want to do what everybody else is doing. And there's also kind of this social pressure sometimes where people are like, oh, don't raise them. You want to make it fun for everybody. And there's someone at the table who's telling you, like, oh, friendly game. Let's make it a friendly pot, trying to dissuade somebody from playing too aggressively, but actually you really want to be the person who is doing the opposite of what everybody else is doing or what other people want you to do, right? So if everybody's playing really passively, you want to play a little more aggressively. Um, and vice versa. If there's too many players that are, playing overactive, it actually benefits you to sit back and kind of lie in wait and, wait for them to be playing too many hands. And you're really able to capture, max value for your big hands against those players that are always going to show up to the river with just a really weak range or something that they're not really able to continue with very often.
Yeah, we see lot of players have maybe different styles of playing. I was gonna say that one of our players actually put in as a fun fact that the 7-2 is an underrated hand. They even wrote the 7-2 suited. However, it was not Abi, it was actually Aditya who put that note in. Abi, on the other hand, saying, "Don't let the tilt get to you," which I have to wonder here with the 7-2 from the button. Of course, we don't have a reason to believe that tilt is involved, but the 7-2 from the button, Abi decides to get rid of after initially maybe playing it, even though it's not a very good hand, playing it because he wants to get involved, try to win some chips, maybe thinking that the other players are a little passive. So even though the 7-2 is not the best hand, hoping that he could get away with one there, but it backfires when he gets bet into on the flop and has to fold.
Yeah, and I think that's also, maybe a raise that came from the fact that he was on the button. And that's the other thing about poker, right? Is information is limited in poker and incomplete. But when you're on the button, it does give you do end up being in a position of having the most information out of all the players at the table because you are the person that acts last. And so sometimes people like to take advantage of being in good position, and being in good position is being on the button and being a little bit more liberal with their opens, being a little bit, wider with their opens. But obviously, seven deuce being the worst starting hand is just the widest that you could possibly think of in terms of ranges there. But, you know, they might be playing the seven deuce game and we might not even know it. In a lot of poker games, people love the seven deuce game where, if you win with the worst starting hand in poker, everybody at the table needs to pay you. There's usually side bets involved. Somebody has to, you know, get penalized for folding a better hand. And there's just a lot of fun side games that can come into play. Now, I don't think they're playing the seven deuce game, but certainly sometimes if you see a live stream where there's a lot of people playing seven deuce, that might be what is happening, and it's not just because people think that's a good hand, because certainly it is not.
Speaking of side bets, I figured I'll mention that we got a Susquehanna company-wide side bet going on the Masters tournament. We got an email right before the tournament started saying that uh, if Rory McIlroy takes down the victory, of course repeating his win from last year, then everyone at the firm will get $1,000 bonus for fun, which is
Wow.
something it something that I think the company was started by poker players and by people who like to find edge in the markets and in general in wherever they can find them, if it's at the horse track or in the casino or in the markets. And so there's a lot of interest in sports, understandably, and so we've had similar type of giveaways before around horse races or the Super Bowl and things like that. And so we've all got a big route this going now because, of course, Rory last night went out with the clubhouse lead, 6 ahead of the field after round two. But yeah, so we've
Wait,
all got a big route at the firm.
so I have to know, okay, one, how many people are at the firm? And two, have you guys ever won one of these, side bets before where, somebody won like the Super Bowl or whatever you guys are kind of wagering on over there?
Yeah, so of course, we might have personal, side bets or wagers or fantasy pools, amongst each other. But in terms of official kind of company giveaways or promotions, one thing that the company has done a couple of times since I've been here is they've announced a giveaway where if the Philadelphia Eagles, make the Super Bowl, then the company will charter a jet and invite 50 randomly chosen employees alongside a plus one, so 100 people total, to get flown out to the Super Bowl and attend it, with their plus one, and then kind of fly back on company dime. So unfortunately, I did not win that giveaway when the Eagles ended up going to the Super Bowl. So again, it only gets activated, so to speak, if the Eagles make the Super Bowl, which they did a couple of years ago, and a couple of my friends ended up winning the giveaway and going. Friends, colleagues, I should say, but synonymous in this case.
How did we not lead off this whole poker table and final table with this? Like, this is a great incentive to work for you guys. Are you guys hiring? Because I might be looking for a new job.
We certainly are, and you can find our openings at ccampus.com, and in general, you. Of course, can find any kind of opportunities. We have offices, to your earlier point, across the globe. I want to say we're north of 3,000, maybe even 4 globally at this point. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's certainly above 2,500. Again, offices, of course, main one in Bala outside Philadelphia. We've got offices in the U.S., mainly also in New York and Chicago, in Dublin, London, Sydney, and a few smaller offices across across the globe. In general, we hire for anything and everything. If you are a smart person, if you are intelligent driven, there's a role for you. I happen to, be interested in trading and honestly just kind of solving puzzles, playing games against other people where there was a financial kind of there's a winner, I guess, similar, poker, there's a very obvious, winner of who wins in the end. And so I kind of heard about the game actually when I was heard about the firm when I was a sophomore in college. Went to a poker tournament, and the rest is history. I'll note just quickly here that we have an all in from Jesse. We've talked about the firm for a bit. Jesse stays active, picks up the blinds. Still 5 left. Blinds have gone up a little bit, but we keep on going. But yeah, if you are intelligent, driven, the firm certainly is hiring. I'm a trader, but we have software roles, quant roles, quantitative trader roles, all kinds of fun stuff if you're interested in the markets and wants to participate in an environment where we have a lot of fun, but we also kind of don't take ourselves too seriously and try to make good decisions.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I do feel like a lot of people end up kind of discovering poker in college, which of course plays into some of their interests and what they're looking for in terms of a career path. I certainly also started playing poker in college, my freshman year, actually. And I think it really opened my eyes up to interesting concepts like risk versus reward. And, I feel like as a person leading up to my college days, I was actually a little bit more risk averse. And then I think things like poker and discovering kind of, not only just how fun it is to be able to take risks, but how much big risks actually lead to big payoffs seeing how a big bluff um, would work and how rewarding that was to be able to show somebody a bluff. I think those types of things, I think really got me more interested in the game of poker, but also got me thinking about what I wanted to do for a living and really helped kind of solidify, you know, what what not only my aligned with my interests and my passions outside of the game, but also, how do those things translate into real world careers where um, I would be able to use those skills and feel like I'm having fun with what I'm doing for a living. I mean, obviously, I say that, but I ended up just being a professional poker player as I have been for the last 20 years. But I certainly think that, things like trading and other career paths that are very similar to what I learned in poker would have been the path that I would have gone down if I didn't just stay within poker.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. If you've been watching the chat, there was a giveaway ran a little while ago talking about how many bracelets there are at Susquehanna. Of course, bracelets refer to winning a World Series of Poker tournament and winning such a bracelet. We have a lot of both prior and current poker players at the firm, and like you say, it's a game that introduces and really puts into practice questions and decisions about risk and risk reward and odds and figuring out where you get good odds to make a certain decisions and where you don't. And so it's a game that is pretty multifaceted. And we mentioned before I used to play as well. I played a good amount in college, and since then, I probably still play once a month, but it's gotten to a point where uh, the markets are really competitive and really fun. And so if I'm gonna engage in a similar type of structure, I find that the markets are where I'm gonna put my energy, as opposed to a casino where I maybe don't sit next to the kind of people that I sit next to at Susquehanna, and so I kind of enjoy my work life in the office more than I would in a casino, perhaps. So I've maybe stayed in the trading world more recently than I was doing when I was maybe in college, just out of college. I want to turn back quickly to the action here with Chinmay and Jesse involved in a small blind big blind pot. Of course, they've been involved a couple of times before, and both times maybe played a little differently. We saw the last time it went check check, check check flop turn. This time Jesse decided to bet the flop, and then we saw check check on the turn, and then after Jesse checks the river, Chinmay puts in a big river bluff with the king eight, and Jesse takes some time to think about it before laying it down. Um,
Yeah, I love the fact that Jessie took time to think about it. She ended up folding, but just the fact that she considered calling with the aces on board with King Jack high. I mean, I do see why she put that time and energy into considering it, because certainly there are going to be some scenarios where King Jack is going to be good. And it would have been awesome to see her make that hero call against Chinmay, who's really started to show himself as kind of the big stack bully now. And this is kind of what we were talking about when five-handed play started, where a lot of the chip stacks were very similar to each other in terms of playability. But now, with someone as active as Chinmay, I wish we had a VPIP um, percentage graphic, because I think we would be able to see that Chinmay is far and away the most aggressive player at the table, playing the most number of hands. And that is why he is the chip leader right now. And he's able to, you know, make such a big bluff on the river in that situation. And it was really for most of Jesse's entire stack. And that's the kind of pressure that you want to be able to put on people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's of course a volatile play style, but when we were talking about what we were talking about just before, the idea that in the markets and in poker, you kind of talk about these risk reward and the expected value of different decisions. That seemed like a spot where Chinmay basically says, you know what? my risk reward here for 10,000 chips and Jesse's risk reward look very different. If I lose 10,000, sure, I'll be very sad. I'll be down. Maybe I'll have 15,000 chips left or something. But um, I'll certainly still have enough to play with. Whereas Jessie, that was almost all the chips she had left. So for her, it was much more of a all or nothing type of decision. Whereas Chinmay could afford, so to speak, had enough of a bankroll, so to speak, or a chip stack to be willing to risk that. And so finding that, of course, now we see the VPIP graph on demand here at the bottom. Chinmay with
Nice.
48%, Jesse with 29, Abi, David, and Aditya all around 20%. You're quite right. Chinmay has been active, and we'll throw his best poker advice in here that he shared before the tournament started, just as an indication of how he has viewed the game for the last 2 years that he has played. He says, "No one knows what you're doing if you don't know what you're doing." Um,
Which is true. That's always my biggest problem. I actually have a much tougher time playing against total amateurs than I do against pros because it's really hard to figure out, and put them on hands and to put them on a range and to know what they're doing when they don't even know what they're doing. But I feel like Chinmay's just saying that as his poker advice. I feel like he actually, if he wants people to maybe think that he doesn't know what he's doing, I think that we're very quickly finding out that he certainly knows more than he's letting on. He's been playing poker for 2 years, and that's more than a lot of players at this final table.
Speaking of other players at the final table, we have an all in here. I believe it's between David um, and Abi. Abi picks up the two kings once more, and they were favorable to him last time, and once again they are favorable with I believe Abi picking up a double up here, and David going down. I think maybe with a few chips left, but certainly a tough blow to the chip stack of David. Um, Maybe to your point, maybe one way of reading it when we talk about Chinmay's advice about other people not knowing what you're doing if you don't know what you're doing. Another way to read it is to say, if you, let's say, think you should bluff sometimes and not bluff other times. We talk about how some poker players, they can, for example, look at part of their card. They can figure out that they have either a king or a queen based on how they look at their card, and then you can make a play where if you don't know if you're bluffing or value betting, again, assuming it's a correct spot in terms of theory and so forth, it can actually be quite powerful, especially in live play, where if you are able to sort of firmly know that you're making a play where you don't know all the information and your opponent also doesn't know, uh, there's no read to get because they can't read your face if you don't even know if you're bluffing or value betting. Of course, that is maybe plays more into other side games of poker, the draw games and so forth, the mixed games. But yeah, Chinmay has certainly showed that he is willing to play and let the chips fall as they may, and both put in big value bets and big bluffs, and it's led him to the top of the leaderboard so far with 5 players left, $1,500 for the next player out, and 10,000 for first.
Yeah, and that's also, I think on a theoretical level, why players randomize as well, right? When certain decisions kind of carry a very similar EV, then you really don't need to, in order to kind of throw your opponents off or make it so that it's a little bit harder for your opponents to read the situation in terms of if you're value betting or if you're bluffing, then it definitely makes it a lot more difficult because that's the other part of the game. People sometimes get so fixated on, okay, poker is just about making a good hand or what do I have? But there's also this other element of um, deceiving your opponents, manipulating what they think, not only just of the hand, but of you and your play, and not being able to be someone that's easily read and someone that can, someone whose patterns are easily discernible. Those are all things that you have to think about when you play.
Yeah, exactly. And especially now, when you first sit down at a table, you might not know, who you're playing against or what their tendencies are, or if they're likely to bluff, if they're likely to have a high VPIP. Again, VPIP meaning voluntarily put money in pot, referencing how often they choose to voluntarily engage in a hand and race or call and put money in themselves. If you don't know, how often your opponents are gonna be aggressive or be passive, then um, then you certainly are going to have a harder time making correct decisions as opposed to now we played, I think 25, 30, 35 hands. The players have started getting a feel for who's who. Here we see a queen jack all in, and Jessie calls it off pretty quickly with the ace jack, and she gets rewarded on the ace high flop. Of course, queen jack still had some outs on the flop, but already on the turn, Jesse's gonna lock up the win with the ace jack to double up. So couple of all ins and calls here where the bigger stack has lost, and so we're still at five players, still staying alive. Um, but yeah, we've seen, I think play um, has opened up a little bit, where the first maybe few hands after we had a flurry of eliminations were a little bit slower. A lot of maybe small bets being played, small bets being put in, and now when we get down to it, people have started to get a feel for how everyone else is going to play, and now we've seen a couple more all-ins. So still a long ways to go to get down to a single winner. But blinds are of course ever increasing here at 800, 1600 now, soon to go to 1000, 2000. So David sitting on just 4 big blinds with the 6400 chip stack is going to need to do something soon. King 3, not quite it, but definitely gonna have to happen soon.
Yeah, so Chinmay in the small blind with deuces and is going to move all in against Abby's stack. 16 bigs effective here for Abby, and he can't call it off with Jack 6 of clubs. And I actually really like this play from Chinmay. I mean, I can't say that I'm surprised to see him make this play, just given what he's done so far at the final table. Just realizing again that his opponent is going to have to call off their entire stack. And right now, ICM pressure is extremely high, right? Because David is sitting there with 3.2 big blinds. So, think about the number of hands that you might be willing to call it off there if you were Abby in the big blind off of 16 bigs. Now that is going to shrink a lot because you have a very good chance of outlasting David and getting that pay jump. And so you're going to even have to be tighter in terms of your calling off range. And so I really feel like Chinmay, again, maybe understood the situation, read everything perfectly, and decided deuces is definitely a good enough hand to just shove here, and I'm going to get a lot of folds.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those spots where, our viewers at home, especially if you're less familiar, on the graphics, when it shows that deuces, or the two twos, as they're often called, deuces, they might only have a 52% chance of winning against another hand. I think maybe in this case it was slightly higher, like 54, 55% against the Jack 6 suited. Of course, those percentages are if we go to showdown, if we go all in and we run out 5 cards. What Chinmay did, he put it all on the line and forced the Jack 6 to relinquish those, 45% chance of winning the pot, which of course is very beneficial to Chinmay. So he, of course, with a big pickup of the blinds there, as we see Aditya with the 2 jacks into David, who smiles a little bit, I think, before throwing away the 7 deuce.
Yeah, and this is certainly, the point in the tournament where even when people know exactly what Chinmay's doing, they see his strategy, they see that he's been super active. There's not a lot that they can do about it, right? They're somewhat handcuffed to play by the rules of ICM, so to speak, where they realize, okay, well, if survival is a part of the game and I'm not picking up big hands, you know, I don't need to be the hero. I don't need to be the person to try to play back against Chinmay, but it doesn't mean that they are not understanding or privy to his strategy. I think they've certainly picked up on that. It's just that at this point, there's not a lot that they can do about it, unfortunately, with David sitting on such a short stack, especially. And so there is just kind of that point in the game where you're not really able to mount an effective counter strategy at this point, but things might change and you're just waiting for that dynamic to shift a little bit so that you can start thinking about, how you're able to maneuver given what you've seen Chinmay do. But if you don't, you're just going to put yourself in a situation where you're just going to continue to blind down. Um, and and that's what Chinmay wants is he kind of wants to bleed you out slowly, right? He wants to just without risking a lot himself, he wants to just continue to chip away at those big blinds, chip away at your stack.
Yeah, I think, an example of this, what you're talking about is Aditya here with the ace eight offsuit. Normally it's certainly a hand you want to play, but you have to think that in the back of Aditya's mind here, he's thinking, it's Chinmay in the big blind. Chinmay's not going to fold if he has a decent hand. And so am I really gonna want to play a big pot against Chinmay when I risk going out in fifth place and only picking up 1,500 instead of maybe just waiting a few more hands, having some other player go all in and lose, and now be guaranteed 2,000. Of course, Aditya in this case decides to play with the ace eight, gets called by Chinmay's king nine, and now Chinmay kind of gets what he wished for in the sense that he flops top pair, gets bet into, and has kind of the opportunity to make some real chips against another medium to big stack.
Yeah, and that's another part of the game, right? Is that I mean, I feel like sometimes you're so aggressive, you're playing so many hands, and people are like, oh, there's no way he has anything. He never has anything. He's just bluffing all the time. And then you start either picking up big hands because that's just how it works. Just because you've been bluffing a lot doesn't mean you can't get aces as well. Or you start connecting with the flop, making top pair. And then maybe you end up getting paid off a little bit lighter because of your table image. So there are a lot of benefits to being the most aggressive player at the table because, you know, if you start picking up hands, you will certainly be able to maximize the value of your good hands because people are going to think that you don't very often have it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chinmay puts in the race with the king nine, takes down the pot, and is now in the commanding chip lead with just about double the next player with Abi, Aditya, and Jesse, all kind of around the 12 to 15 big blind stack level. Um, 5 players left, 1,500 for fifth place, 2,000 for fourth, 3,000 for third, 5,000 for second, and then of course 10,000 for first. So still a lot to play for. Still some tough spots to navigate with different chip stacks among your opponents. Aditya here with the king seven suited again decides to play. Actually, just puts in the 2,000 now that the blinds are up to 1-2 to see if he can get along. Maybe play a small pot with a decent hand in king seven. And he's going to get some bad news here as Chinmay picks up the ace jack and puts in a raise. Aditya in a bit of a sad spot where he has to put in more money with the king seven, but decides that it's still worth the extra 4,000 into a pot that's now 14. And now we have quite a big pot, for this stage of the tournament. 2 players going to the flop with 14,000 in the middle, which is almost 2 times David's stack at 8,200. Both players playing it safe, keeping it light, checking on the flop, and then Aditya taking the bait on the turn. Similar to what Maria was saying before, that sometimes if you get checked to twice, why don't you take that as a sign that your opponent is perhaps not that strong? Aditya tries to take advantage of that. Chinmay comes along with the ace jack, perhaps sensing that Aditya is getting a little bit aggressive here with only king high, and he decides to bluff the river as well with the all-in bet. This is certainly the biggest spot of the day, biggest pot if called, I believe, and of course a huge bluff on the river when Chinmay is thinking about it, sitting on just ace jack high on this board. Chinmay going deep into the tank. Suspicious why Aditya did not bet the flop if he had a good hand. And really not sure what he's doing. He is gonna call it off with the ace jack offsuit. Ace high is gonna win, eliminating Aditya in 5th place. What a hero call. Chinmay now with the commanding chip lead. Has more than 50% of the chips in play, as we applaud Aditya for his efforts. Down to 4 players, and David pretty happy with only 8,000 chips. Just saw a pot of about 60,000 get played ahead of him, leading to him moving up to a guaranteed payout of 2,000 instead of 1,500 that Aditya was paid for his efforts. While we do a little bit of a chip count and a little bit of a shuffle, we'll go over quickly. We've got 4 players left. Those of you at home rooting, we've got Chinmay, who is from Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, goes to UPenn, studies AI, atop the standings with 93,000. Then we've got Abhi, who is from Mumbai, goes to Purdue and studies applied math and economics. Big FIFA player, should be noted, is sitting in 2nd with 27,000. Jessie, who goes to MIT, is from Hangzhou, studies mathematics at MIT. She's in 3rd place with 23,000. And whose best poker advice is to keep calm, which she certainly has so far to her benefit, to make it to 3rd place in the current standings. And then, of course, we have David from Syracuse in 4th, from Port Chester, New York, studies computer science and math at Syracuse, who has a very good point about how to approach the game of poker and also trading or any other kind of strategy or decision-making situation you have ahead of you. He says, evaluate the process, not the outcome, which is going to play a role here where Jesse races with the 2 4s and David decides to say, you know what, ace 6 is as good a hand as I'm gonna get, and he puts in the stack. Hey Maria, welcome back. You missed a big hand with
No.
I think a clash between what could have been the top 2 players in the standings, and of course now you come back to another elimination where Jesse with the 2 4s races, gets called or slightly raced by David's ace 6 in the big blind. David, who outlasted Aditya, who went out in 5th, gets the 4th place finish for 2,000, with Jesse picking up and moving ahead of Abhi's 26,000. So I'll recap the hand briefly. Of course, viewers should be able to go back in the stream if they want to catch up on Chinmay's real big hero call to vault to atop the standings. Him and Aditya were involved in a pot where I believe, let's see if I can recall the action. I want to say that Aditya raced pre with the king 7 suited, then was 3-bet, min raise pre 500,000 blinds, min raise pre to 2,000, 3-bet by Aditya, who Aditya races with the king 7 suited, is 3-bet by Chinmay with the ace jack offsuit to 6,000. Aditya puts in the call. Chinmay from the small blind checks the queen 3 deuce or queen 4-3 flop, and Aditya checks it back. Turn is a 5. It goes check from Chinmay. Aditya bets, bluffs, and then Chinmay calls with the ace jack high. River is a 9 offsuit. And Chinmay checks. Aditya goes for glory with king 7 suited, no pair, and Chinmay thinks about it for quite some time. It's about 18,000 into, I think, about 30, maybe 25, and ends up putting in the hero call with the ace jack with just ace high
Wow.
to eliminate Aditya. So hence the big chip lead from Chinmay, who's now firmly in first with over 50% of the chips in play, as we are down to 3-handed.
Yeah, and here just trying to bluff Jesse off a pair of 5s. So far, it looks like Jesse's going to stick around for the river.
We'll make a quick note that we have another giveaway going in the chat. I've got a couple more minutes to reply, so if you look down in the chat, you'll see a question with the opportunity to win some swag if you can figure out the right answer. So go to the chat for potential giveaway. As we see Jesse taking it down with a single pair, maybe being willing to play a little bit more now that there's no short stack left. It's just 3 players left who all have over a 10 big blind stack. So just a little bit of playability still.
Yeah, and this isn't going to necessarily apply at this live stream final table, but it happens a lot at final tables where the players will have breaks or have their phones where sometimes they could step away from the table to check from their friends watching the stream who are giving them information and some updates on some of the previous hands that have happened, again, because we're on a delay to protect the game integrity. But there is still this free flowing kind of access to information that players get when there is a live stream, which didn't really exist before the era of live streams, of RFID cards, of all of these different technologies that are made available, so that it's kind of changed the meta and the strategy of the game. And so it kind of allows players to adapt and adjust their strategy in real time against the information that they're getting about what the other players are doing. And we've talked so much about how, these players definitely are on to Chinmay a little bit now. But let's say it hasn't been so blatantly obvious, right? But if your friend is watching the stream for you and they tell you, okay, Chinmay's so active, he keeps bluffing post flop, he's raising free with very bad starting hands, then you're going to maybe want to change the way that you are going to play against Chinmay. It might make you open up, your calling ranges against him, the hands you defend with, um, and you might be more willing to make hero calls against him post flop. And so I think it's that kind of access to information now in poker that really makes it so that you have to always be thinking so quickly on your feet. You already had to adapt and adjust, but now there's, not only the information you get, but knowing that your opponent knows you're getting that information as well, right? So levels to it. And I'm sure kind of in trading, obviously, the more information you get, the better you're able to make an informed decision. But, how quickly is that access to information? How quickly are you guys able to act on it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. Of course, like you allude to in poker, if you, sort of, again, the live stream is on a delay. So if you have a friend who's watching the live stream, they can see, 15 minutes later in this case, and say, hey, you actually got bluffed in that hand, which of course the players in the moment, they don't know. But with the advent of the live stream, they can get that information afterwards. And like you said, implement that into, their decision making going forward. In trading, it really is it's sort of a complex game tree, if you will, where we'll just see quickly here. Jesse decides to just call with the 10-9, and Chinmay quickly puts the pressure on with an all-in. I'll get back to answer your question in a second as we just see Jesse here, prudent limp fold with the 10-9 suited, realizing that it's really hard to be ahead of Chinmay's all in, and so she decides to stay in second place with her 30,000 chips and live to see another day. To answer your question, though, the 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 way you can, with various quantitative metrics, try to identify what are competitors doing, what are players that are active in the market doing, is a very big piece of how to make good decisions in the market, right? And so that kind of game of multiplayer, everyone is involved, and you have to kind of figure out, not only what do I think and what do I think is the right decision, but also what might other players in the space be doing, is going to help you a lot. Because if you know that they are, or if you have a suspicion to believe that they are acting in a certain way, that's going to inform your decision making going forward. As we see here, Chinmay getting caught with the hand in the cookie jar, as we sometimes say, getting it in with a worse hand, trying to put pressure on Jesse's ace king, and so far so good for Jesse, who is poised to have a big double up here if she can keep holding with the ace king. Which she does, of course. Ace playing with both players playing the Jackson Force 2-pair on the board, but Jesse's ace ensuring her the double up to put her just atop the standings. I believe it is the first time today that Jesse is sitting in first. I mentioned while you were off, Maria, that Jesse's number one poker advice is to keep calm, which certainly has served her well throughout this final table, as she has maneuvered all-ins, big hands, big pots, calling and then folding with a 10-9 a few hands prior to avoid getting put in, having to play a big all-in pot with that hand. So, she's certainly been keeping it calm and trying to, see if she can make it all the way, which she's quite poised to do now atop the standings with just 3 players left.
Yeah, and so Avi's kind of, just the lone person out there on this island of being the short stack. And again, 7.8 big blinds, not going to be a lot of post-flop play available with that stack size. Just going to be leaning more towards some all-in shoves. Can certainly defend the big blind off of that stack size, especially against a min-raise. So you might see him looking to do that with some marginal hands. But, otherwise, just watching the Chinmay and Jesse show. And I feel like from the beginning of the final table until now, that was just the way that it was destined to go down. They were involved in pots early against one another, you know, over and over again within the first few orbits. They got into several pots heads up. And now it's them two with the big stack and Avi on the short stack, just really hoping that he can turn things around, double through one of them, and then it's anybody's game, really.
Yeah, seriously, and to your point here, we see Chinmay staying involved, calling the 3,000 from the button. Jesse with the option, the big blind, of course. Those of our viewers who are new to poker, when you are in the big blind and there's only a call ahead of you, you've already been forced to put in the big blind of 3,000. So Jesse gets the option to say, let's not put any more money in. Let's just check and see the flop, which she does. Of course, both players now check the flop quickly, not connecting either one of them. So this is what you're going to get when you get down to shorthanded play, of course. A lot of times there aren't that many, hands out there. There's only 3 players playing. So you're going to have a lot of these types of hands where neither player makes a pair. And it's really about who can navigate that well and who can figure out, even if I don't have a pair, can I try to win the pot? Maybe with a bluff, maybe with a semi-bluff, maybe with a check raise. And of course, Chinmay in that spot gets away with one with the 9-3 offsuit. But yeah, of course, Abi, every hand that Jesse and Chinmay play against each other, Abi's going to be pretty happy because that increases the chances that he actually gets to do nothing and still end up in in a battle for first in case Jesse or Chinmay knock each other out.
Yeah, certainly there's like this collision effect that can happen in poker, right? Especially against two active players, um, whether it is them both picking up big hands or just because they are so active that they end up playing a huge pot almost unnecessarily sometimes. And that is maybe at best what Abby can hope for if he's really card dead. But the king eight suited, I think, is certainly good enough to go with. I feel like, especially against a limp from Chinmay, I would have liked to see Abby go all in after just the call out of the small blind.
Yeah, I think those are interesting spots where, again, poker as a strategic game, you have to keep in a, in your head, or take into account what other decisions have been made previously. And so, of course, Chinmay has gone all in from the small blind several times before. So when Chinmay decides to just call the big blind, maybe Abby can take that as a signal that Chinmay is not that strong. Of course, Chinmay can balance that by just calling with some strong hands, but it definitely does um, put the game into perspective, right? Where we talk about how do you make kind of the optimal decision against who you think you're playing against. And so
Yeah.
if you can deduce that your opponent is likely to, maybe go all in with their good hands and play a little bit more passively with their bad hands, that gives you an opportunity to take a hand like King Eight and maybe go all in yourself and say, hey, this is a pretty good hand. I'm gonna make a bet. I'm gonna wager that my opponent actually doesn't have a good hand, and then maybe take down the pot. But yeah, Chinmay puts in a bluff and takes down the previous pot. So blinds up here to 1,500, 3,000. Abhi certainly getting into that danger zone of being below 10 big blinds with Jesse and Chinmay still north of 20. So a lot of play left, of course, but Abhi is certainly getting low on chips with the big blind coming around pretty quickly these days.
Yeah, it's definitely time, I think, for Abby to go with a lot of hands, especially on the button. You know, that's the only spot that you're gonna get where it's unopened to you. You're just facing the blinds. Chinmay with a nice hand, ace jack here, and you know, Jesse folding jack nine from the small blind, I will say is interesting. I think sometimes you will see players want to call and limp in from the small blind with that. But again, if you're up against a very aggressive player to your left, maybe you don't necessarily want to put yourself in situations where you're not really sure where your hand will stand, you know, how good it is. If you don't think you can face a lot of aggression post flop without connecting pretty well with the board, then sometimes out of just an abundance of caution, you are going to want to fold maybe some of the marginal hands that you would otherwise be limping in with against maybe a more passive opponent in the big blind, or maybe someone less experienced, or you know, a player that is not showing themselves to be kind of as willing to go for it in as many spots as Chinmay has.
Yeah, exactly. It kind of really works to Chinmay's advantage that he has been pretty aggressive, because it does force Jesse to kind of go into a more passive stance with the jack nine. Of course, Chinmay here picking up 2 10s, which is a very nice hand. He goes all in, and of course gets his opponents to fold here. Abhi with the king queen uh, decides to get away with it. Of course, he could have decided to play, but after Jesse raised the button, Abhi probably hoping that maybe he's up against two other good hands that will play anyway, to put him in the opportunity to maybe um, fold and still move up the leaderboard if one of them gets knocked out. But to his dismay, of course, Jesse didn't have a hand to play with, so she folds as well. And Chinmay back up again on top. Of course, he was briefly in second there after Jesse won a big pot against him, but now he is taking the lead once more. Abhi slipping below the 5 big blind mark, and it's kind of those nerve-wracking last few hands of the tournament where it's almost like every decision matters more, because of course the dollar amounts at stake are much higher now than they were previously. because you are, still playing for that first place prize of 10,000. But at the same time, you're getting fatigued. It's been a long day. Maybe you flew in last night. Maybe you went out. Maybe you met some friends. It's hard to stay on top of your game. But of course, these are the decisions that are the most important. So we'll see if the players can stay on top of their game throughout these last few hands before we crown a winner.
And I don't want to say that, players give up, but you also are looking at the fact that like Abby's sitting there saying, "Hey, I'm guaranteed 3,000 at minimum if I get eliminated now." So, it's definitely not a bad consolation prize. Certainly, I would love to win in this spot, but you also have to remember you started out at this final table with 9 players where the minimum payout was $500, and now you have, you know, been able to ladder all the way up to third. And so maybe today might not be the day that you're going to win, but you're certainly going to be able to take home a nice chunk of change as Abby does decide that Queen 9 suited is good enough to move all in from the big blind.
Yeah, we have to give some credit. We were asking for this type of aggression from Avi before, just a couple of hands ago with the King 8 suited, and he does just that here with the Queen 9 after seeing Chinmay just called the big blind. So Avi picks up a welcome 3,000 from Chinmay, and still in there, still battling away. Of course, like you said, locked up 3,000, but still a lot to play for.
And I also just noticed, Anders, that you guys have somebody shuffling the other deck so that you guys can turn these hands over so quickly. I love it. I'm like, wow, you guys have a personal side shuffler. I love it.
Yeah, it's something. Certainly, we talk about how the players have to play worse hands now that you're shorthanded because it's much fewer hands to choose from in terms of having good hands. But of course, fewer players also means the play goes faster. So if the dealer has to shuffle the cards after every hand, it takes a little bit longer. And so we have a very, very nice help here to make sure that we have the play going along speedily. And speaking of speedily, that is the call from Chinmay in the big blind after Avi goes all in with the ace queen. Of course, ace queen all in and at risk. You have to think that Avi, seeing the ace, breathes a sigh of relief. But of course, the ace in the window doesn't defend him from the potential from a straight here. Still needs to dodge a jack to double up, which he does. Of course, very, very welcome pickup here from Avi, who shows that a little bit of patience and a little bit of luck with the cards, and you too can make a run for it. So now we're again in that territory where everyone has chips, and you don't want to make a misstep again now that the decisions are worth more.
Yeah, and you can't blame Chinmay, obviously, with the king queen. Certainly, there's been other hands that we've seen that he's gotten a little out of line with, but that certainly falls into the category of just very standard in terms of being all in there. And it was almost unlucky that Abby woke up with an even stronger hand. A lot of the times, king queen's just going to be the best of it there. And, we saw Abby had shoved the hand before with queen 9. And if that were the spot, then Chinmay would have had him dominated. So you could just see how, quickly kind of from hand to hand, things change.
Certainly is it is the beauty of the game, I think, and again with the comparison to trading, the beauty of the markets is that every day is a new day, and every tournament is new, and every constellation of players that you're playing against is ever changing. Speaking of changing, we just see the blinds here go up to 2,000, 4,000. Means we're into our 8th blind level. And these players are trying their best to outlast one another to move up top, but the clock does not stop. They are now paying a big blind every third hand of a full 4,000, which is going to maybe lead to some slightly more aggressive play. We will see, but yeah,
So what would
still.
the trading equivalent be of a chip in a chair then?
A chip and a chair, the trading equivalent. I would my first thought went to the really asymmetric payoff that options can give. I work in options trading. I've traded options now for 6 years, and a chip and a chair, of course, for those of our viewers who are not familiar, refers to the idea that when you're playing in a poker tournament, of course, your chips you're playing with have no monetary value. They're just a currency that's used within the tournament, and they're just to designate, who has sort of chips left to play with. And so if you have just one chip left in a tournament, that means you are almost eliminated. But of course, having a chip left means you still can make that chip into two and make those two chips into four and so forth, and potentially make it all the way up to the top and end up with all the chips in play and therefore winning the tournament. And so in trading, the that kind of violent or really asymmetric kind of change in fortunes. I think as an options trader, I'd probably liken to the idea that an option can be worth 2 cents today, and it can be worth $2 or $200 tomorrow. It really allows for those kind of really explosive changes in fortunes where if you have a position on, it can move against you or for you in a very violent manner, in a similar way that you can, with the right cards, really rocket up the standings in a poker tournament and similarly fall just as quickly.
Yeah. To go the other way, but it's so easy to just get wrapped up in, the upward trend that sometimes you forget that you need to be able to weigh your decisions against, the risk of ruin and just not I think being too overly aggressive or overly active and just kind of not overplaying your situation, right? I think especially when players are the chip leader or things have been going so well and things seem to be going smoothly, they end up overpacing. And at a final table, you have to sometimes put your foot on the brake. It's not always going to be gas all the time.
Speaking of gas all the time, we see Chinmay take down a quick pot here, putting pressure on Jesse by just putting all of his chips on the line, saying, "Hey, because of the lack of aggression pre-flop and your check on the flop, I just don't think you have a good hand." And so he puts all of his money on the line and gets rewarded in this instance. But of course, when you make a really big bet, hoping that your opponent doesn't have anything, sometimes they do. But Chinmay staying on top the leaderboard, still with 80,000. Avi here, probably considering an all-in with the ace king, and Jesse taking a little bit of time before letting it go.
Yeah, and I think Shinmei is also really demonstrating, the fact that when you are able to pad your stack in a way where you have playability and you have the big stack, you can double up a short stack and then you can still take down a few post flop pots with, a bluff here or maybe a pre flop raise that takes down the blinds. And you can still, without having to necessarily go all in, you're still able to chip up really nicely and put yourself back into a very comfortable position. So, it does allow for not even room for errors, really, because I wouldn't say that Chinmay has made a big mistake. And certainly the King Queen versus the Ace Queen all in was not a mistake, but it just allows for you to not have to win every pot and for you to be able to lose a few pots, but still be able to maintain your chip position. So it's really nice to find yourself in a situation. But again, kudos to the player, right? Because the player has to be making those things happen. Sometimes players get a little bit gun shy after doubling up their opponent and they kind of retreat and they're like, no, maybe I shouldn't be raising so much. Maybe I'm playing too many hands. But that's just not been Chinmay's game whatsoever. He's just continued to, play his game and it's really just worked out because now he kind of has both Jesse and Abby in a bad situation because Jesse is now waiting out Abby Chinmay with, a decent number of chips more than both of his competitors. And, his competitors are starting to get into that situation where, if he starts opening relentlessly, they're really going to have to fold a lot of hands.
Yeah, and he certainly has not been uh, too shy of doing that, which might put him in a bad spot here, where looks like he's considering a bluff here with the Jack 4, hoping that um, Abi has not picked anything up. But unfortunately for him, it looks like Abi hit 2 pair on the river after playing the earlier parts of the hand pretty passively. And so Abi is thinking about it, but you have to think between calling and uh, and going all in, which he chooses the latter. Of course, Chinmay is just sighing a little bit before letting his bluff go. But nice pickup for Abi with a big 5 on the river, getting him an extra couple of chips with Chinmay's bluff.
Yeah, a little bit of posturing there on the end by Chinmay, not wanting to make it very obvious that he was bluffing when he let out there. And it's funny because it just reminds me of a lot of things in live poker with these streams that happen where we've had players kind of like tank for a long time and then do make this big show of like, oh, I just folded such a good hand when really they didn't have anything. And then people are just watching it back on stream laughing because it's like you do still want to do it in the moment because you don't know who has access to information from the streamer who doesn't. But then it's almost silly when you watch yourself back being like, oh, but everybody's going to find out anyways that I didn't have anything and I was just putting on this big show, or like making it seem like I took this huge bad beat on the river, or that someone caught up on the river against my hand when they really didn't. And so it's pretty funny. It creates some some funny situations after the fact where I'll just be texting my friend and I'll be like, you went through all of that and we see that you had nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure maybe a few of our players will look back at a couple of hands earlier, or sort of look back at this coverage and see, wonder if they could have played a hand differently, or if they, should have thought more about this or that decision, which you were off, but I mentioned briefly earlier that our fourth place finisher, David, from who goes to Syracuse, he put in that his best poker advice is a very sound one. He says, evaluate your process and not the outcome. A bad result does not mean you made a bad decision, which is obviously very, very important in poker. You can get it in with the best hand. You can go all in with 2 aces and play against 7 deuce, and 13% of the time or something, you're still going to lose. And of course, if you get it all in with aces versus 7 deuce and you lose, it's not necessarily anything wrong with your process, even if you're sad about the result. And so that is, of course, what strategy is all about, worrying about what goes into a decision, not necessarily what the end result ends up being, because you can only control the former.
Yeah.
As we see Abi contemplate how to play his short stack here with a normally playable hand. I'll mention too. You mentioned the chip in a chair analogy. I'll mention one more kind of trading analogy, which is chip in a chair. I think often also is used about not being down on your luck. Just because you lost a big pot, or um, you have slowly dwindled down your chip stack. It's almost like an optimistic phrase, right? It's like, look, you can still win. Sure, your odds are not great. Your probability of winning is not that high, but you have a chip. You still have a chance of having something good happen for you. And so that kind of optimism and I think maybe not reliance, but the perspective of thinking about how can I make a good decision to make this one chip go into 2 chips and 4 chips and so forth, is really important, in any job that you do. But I think, in trading, in these kind of strategy-based professions, where you really have to ensure that you show up and you try to make the best decision you can, and don't let yourself get anchored to, or change your strategy just because of a bad result. Just because you have a small chip stack doesn't mean that, like, you're gonna lose. realistically, of course, you're likely to, but in terms of having a good perspective and trying to make kind of good, objectively positive expectancy decisions, the idea of, you know, having that optimism and feeling like as long as you just keep having a good process and making good decisions, you never know. Chip in a chair. You could always get lucky and have your fortunes turn, which again is not something you can control, but you can control the process and the attitude.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I mean, I know in poker it can be so hard to kind of separate the emotional from the logical and rational. And so it's like in that situation when you're down to just one chip, it's, and in trading, it's like when you maybe don't have as many resources to allocate, like, is it very difficult for people to just be able to separate the fact that, okay, this might be like the case money on the table. Am I still able to make a good decision in the moment, knowing that it's do or die, right? Where that's a big problem that I think poker players face is even if you can intellectualize that moment and know like this is the best decision, I still need to, bluff, or I still need to move all in with this hand. They're afraid to pull the trigger, right?
Yeah, I think the cleanest analogy I would think of. Let's just see what Jesse does here. Does she go all in or just raise? It might be a big hand. Might have two big hands colliding here. With Chinmay announcing all in. And this is Avi's dream spot, right? He gets to fold with just 15,000 left, and Jesse is putting it in, of course, with the best hand here with ace king suited. I'll get back to your question in a few seconds, but of course, the two chip leaders here, putting it all on the line. Chinmay's volatile play style is put him in a bad spot in this case. But again, you've got to evaluate the process, not the outcome. Jesse could have also had a worse hand. Of course, with the ace on the flop, it looks even more dire. Chinmay looking for a heart, maybe another heart, to knock out Jesse and be poised to take it all down. But he can't find it, so I think we're gonna see Jesse pick up a very, very big pot here. Of course, Chinmay still alive. Chinmay and Avi now pretty similar in chip stacks, very close to 2 or 3 big blinds, and Jesse the far and away biggest chip leader. Quite the nice pickup for Jesse, but again, Chinmay gets stuck with the bad end of a king queen hand, which is really hard to regret. With only
Yeah.
10 big blinds, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, now, this is just a prime position for Jessie. You're just going to imagine that she's just going to be pretty much putting her opponents all in every chance that she gets. There's not going to be very many hands. She's going to be folding to those chip stacks. This is just where your odds are just never bad enough with a good portion of your range where you're never going to be that big of a dog against any other hands that Avi and Chin may have when they only have 2.5 bigs and 1.5 bigs basically. um, Especially since Jesse's going to be both in the small blind and big blind 2 out of the 3 hands anyway, so already quite invested and pot committed against those stack sizes.
Yeah, we see our dealer here is counting out all the chips, making sure that we all agree that the number of chips that each player has adds up to what we expect. In the meantime, I'll take a second and reply to your question about spots where it might be particularly hard to make the objectively best decision. I think a classic example has to do with incentives, right? Incentives play a big role. Of course, in poker, we talk about, are you incentivized to play more aggressive or play more passive? But in trading, the incentive structure, can have to do with if you have certain cutoffs. You bring up, I don't work at a hedge fund, but I'll use a hedge fund as an example, where if they are evaluated on an annual basis, then as you get close to the end of the year, you might look at your performance and say, hey, I have a pretty good performance here. I'm pretty happy about our results so far, and because I know that I'll get marked, or I'll get my compensation will be based on my annual performance, in dollar terms. even if there is a good bet, so to speak, even if there's a good opportunity to take at the end of the year, if it's particularly volatile, you might see that kind of incentive problem play a role where a hedge fund manager might choose to not take that opportunity or make that bet that was a good bet, but
Yeah.
they choose not to because if they lose, now they'll get evaluated or their compensation will be marked to this losing position. Whereas if they just pretended like that opportunity never existed, they can keep their current sort of performance intact. And so that kind of situation, I think, comes up sometimes where you just if incentives aren't aligned appropriately, you might not take the highest expectancy bets. Which, of course, at Susquehanna, again, we're not a hedge fund. That's just an example in the financial markets. There's a lot of care being put into making sure that traders are always poised to try to make the highest expectancy decisions at all times. That is kind of the game within the game of, I have my book and I have my, positions that I'm watching. But if I think that the firm can make more money in a certain situation, if, if we take this decision or that decision, making sure that the highest expectancy decision is taken is really what you strive for, I think, as a trader.
Yeah, I think that it's definitely something that resonates a lot with the decisions that, poker players make. It's just how often are you able to do that? Because the more often you're able to do that and, to be objective in those moments, a lot of times the more successful you will be. But sometimes it's really hard to, and, we're all human, and that's why robots are, that's why AI and things like that are beating humans in poker because they're able to objectively make the best decision all the time.
Yeah, no, you bring up a good point, and of course, AI and AI tools is all the rage in financial markets, not the least at Susquehanna, and they are a great tool, both of course in the trading strategies they can maybe make or aid, but also just in the productivity gains that you see by being able to use AI to quickly access information that previously took much longer, or you needed much more kind of human manpower or time to access. So very, very exciting time, both of course for humanity, so to speak, but also in the markets to see where we move in that direction. I'll make a quick note here, of course, for our viewers that the previous hand played out very quickly. Abi and Chinmay, of course, with the same hand, different suits, ended up chopping the pot. I believe that was our first chopped pot of the day, which of course means that they both had the same hand. Because no one made a flush, there's no such thing as one suit being better than the other. So both players take back the chips they wagered and live to fight another day. And of course, Abi in the next hand looks down at an ace and says, "Look, with two big blinds, I'm gonna risk it all," and picks up a much needed big blind and a half. With Chinmay now for the first time of the day, I think, looking at really being in firmly in last place, and of course still a chip in a chair, like we said,
Yeah.
but it's gotta feel it's emotionally, right. These are the spots we're talking about. You are gonna feel less happy, now being in this situation, knowing that what could have been, so to speak.
Yeah, and it's hard, to be riding a high for so much of the final table to just, come out guns blazing and to have that chip lead for so long. And then now to be in this position, it is really hard mentally to kind of adjust to this idea that, like, now everything that I was doing that was working, it's not available to me anymore. And now I'm just, gonna have to go all in, be at the mercy of the hands that I get dealt. And nobody likes to not be able to be in control of their own fate.
Of course, as we see an all in here with Chinmay putting in the queen jack, thinking two big blinds, it's going to be good enough. And Jesse picking up a lot of outs here, needs a heart, a 5, a 6 to knock out Chinmay and go down to the final two. Very spicy turn card. We'll see if the river delivers. It does not. I believe the jack is going to end up playing here with king, king, queen, jack, 8 being the best hand. So Chinmay, much needed double up, even if the turn card was quite scary. And we have 3 people still staying alive. Again, chip in a chair. You got to stay committed to the process, try to make good decisions, and let the chips fall as they may, as we say.
Yeah, and so as we mentioned, Jessie, who is at MIT with a major in mathematics, and she's been playing poker for just a year, and I feel like she has really good table presence for somebody who, hasn't been playing for very long, just has seemed very collected here. And, whether she was a shorter stack or now that she has chips, emotionally not really wearing anything on her face. You don't want to ride that roller coaster of, being at the mercy of, you know, how many chips you have in front of you is how good you are feeling about the way that you're playing or anything like that. And really seems to be able to have a good separation from the mental game of poker. And, she seems like she feels very comfortable, it seems. And I think she, like I said, maybe sees the writing on the wall, feels like, these are both two very short stacks. And as long as they don't, go on a heater of a lifetime, maybe this 10K is hers to win.
It's probabilistically, it certainly seems likely. She's got just over 2/3 of the chips in play, or just about 2/3 of the chips in play. So definitely may be the case. Abhi here, last orbit, he looked down at an ace. He decided that was good enough. This time he looks down at 2 6s, and again decides it's good enough. Chinmay here with the king 3. It really hurts when you only start with 20,000 and you have to pace 6 of them. And so it looks like he may have decided to make the call here with the king 3, saying, you know what, this is it between me and Abhi. King 3 is not the best hand, but 3-handed is also not the worst. The 6s, of course, stay alive. 6s are obvious and at risk here. Chinmay with slightly more hits a king on the turn. What a turn of events here. Abhi needs a 6 and a 6 only and can't get there. What a run for Abhi. He's lived by the sword, died by the sword. He had kings twice himself, won those 2 pots, and of course now is eliminated by a turn king, just as he was saved by a turn king very early in the day when he was all in with the 2 kings. So quite the run. We have to see the players give him a quick applause here, and he gets 3,000 for its efforts, and now we're down to 2.
Yeah, and this is definitely the exciting part about poker, the tournaments especially, is seeing that you could be the last person left in the entire tournament, especially when you started out with so many players. Just the idea that, it's just going to be only you at the end. And when you get heads up, you obviously are going to have to play a little bit differently. Heads up is a much different ball game strategically versus full ring. But I'm sure Jessie knows that Chinmay's not just going to roll over and give her the win. Very tough opponent that she's going to have to face, but should make for a really interesting heads-up match.
Absolutely. We see here the players leaving the table briefly. We are just going to, I think, line up both players on the opposite ends of the table. Of course, Jessie, who goes to MIT, and Chinmay, who goes to UPenn, have been sitting next to each other, have been battling, have been playing hands against each other several times throughout the day. They will be facing off on the opposite ends of the table with 105,000 versus 52,200 quite soon, while there is some coloring up and some readjusting of the seats and the chip stacks. There will be a quick break with the final 2 action continuing shortly. We will also take a quick break from here and expect to be back in about 5 to 7 minutes, where we will soon commence with the the final two playing for a second place of 5,000 and a first place of 10,000 here in the Susquehanna Showdown.
That's because I just learned how to play on online tournaments. So that's like,
This is all kids, right?
yeah, there's all things.
2004, 6, 8.
This is enough for the way. So this total is.
Do you want to leave blacks?
What?
Do you want to leave all the blacks, or do you want to take some of the
I mean, you can take you can turn blacks into purples, I guess.
That's what I'm
like 2 stacks. You know, you can take 2 stacks. I mean, there's no more 5.
No.
I mean, leaving some black chips on the table is fine. I mean, all that happens is they just bet with purples until they like run out.
So 1,000.
So like each of these is two stacks of that is 1 stack of this, right?
2 stacks.
2 stacks of that is 1 stack of this. You can take 2 more stacks off of it.
And how many chips you want to see on the table?
Well, we can always bring more chips back out for the photo. I think this will be alright. It'll make a little pyramid. I mean, there's like.
Sure. I don't have this showmanship.
I don't know. That's up to the marketing people. How many chips we want to leave on the table? Have we taken too many?
They still have plenty. So
They have stacks.
yeah. Even without the 100s, they're still like I'm gonna do like you can see the denominations. So you'll see the thousands, the 500s, like you won't.
I did the blinds right, but at least we're in good shape.
Yeah. I mean, this stack is gonna be like 6 blinds. Yeah, that'd be great.
You're good. Okay. The action makes it. I like it. Yeah, I like it. Like in
Hand
in,
model.
yeah, in movement, it looks good.
It's like 2 to 1. Oh wow.
No, can you read 6? Still lean on the frame.
97, 400? 100? I think, yeah. 20, 40, 60, 80, 90, 5, 6, 7, 4.
They have good cameras. They could also.
20, 40.
Yeah, I would do that now. I have a guy in my ear. Which is like, I would
45, 48, 49, 50, 1, 52, 2? Do we like lose some chips or something? I don't. Let me count her again. Maybe I got like an extra 2 stacks. That looks like 20, 40, 60, 80. Okay.
97 plus 52. How many chips are there supposed to be?
150-ish.
about right. Yeah, 97 plus 52. I mean, then change.
There's 99 people, so I don't know. We rounded up. Things got chipped up during the original chip. We rounded up to 100.
Yeah, that's fine though. That's what you expect, right? There should be about 150,000 chips they all started with.
Correct.
1,500. That's 99. So there should be 135, 148,500.
All right, during the break, we have clarified some of the chip stacks and getting chips and players ready to come back to battle. Of course, we are still on level 8, 3,000, 6,000 blinds, which means both players are sitting at just about 8, 9 blinds for Chinmay and about 15, 16 for Jesse. So action will soon reopen, and we are excited to see who will take down first place for 10,000 in our second Susquehanna Showdown. Of course, last year you and I commentated that one as well, Maria. Are you observing any differences between this one and this one's tournament and last year's?
Yeah, I feel like maybe they might have watched the stream back from last year because there was a lot more aggressive play early on, I think, than what we had seen the year before. I think the year before, people certainly were feeling each other out a lot more with being pretty passive and just kind of sitting back. But we did see, I think maybe it all started with Chinmay, right? And I think sometimes that one player can make all the difference. It can set the tone for the rest of the table. And once one player is seen being really active, sometimes that kind of gets the other players either in this mindset of, well, now I can't sit back because there's someone clearly trying to be the big stack bully, someone trying to be the table captain, and I might need to start playing back a little bit more and doing it sooner than I had wanted or I might have felt comfortable with. One player can definitely change the whole game flow and the table dynamic. And so maybe that was a result of Chinmay. Maybe it was just a specific group of players, but I feel like everybody was kind of willing to get their chips in the middle when they needed to.
Yeah, I agree. It's I mean, you never know who's going to make the final table and who's going to play, but I agree that it's been quite a Chinmay saying, you know what, Queen 9, good enough for me. Let's play. But yeah, like you said, you never know what you're going to get, but the play so far today has been, aggressive, but of course selectively aggressive. You're aggressive in the spots where it seems like you might be able to get away with it, or at least if you aren't getting away with it, you still have something left in the tank. So we'll see how the heads-up match goes. If the first hand is any indication, Chinmay is not going to let up of his fearsome nature the way he's played so far, but of course Jesse has been right up there with him in often second in VPIP and second in pre-flop raise percentage next to him. So probably expecting this to still be quite a competitive heads-up match with the cards really going to do a lot of talking to see who gets the best cards.
Yeah, I'm really looking for Jesse to respond kind of accordingly, just knowing that Chinmay's probably going to be shoving a little bit wider than he should off of his stack, that she's going to appropriately adjust her calling ranges. Again, given their experience, I don't expect that they have these charts memorized because they haven't been playing for very long, but there is that natural feel and intuition that you will have for the game just from playing for a year or for 6 months, where I think intuitively you just start realizing like, okay, if normally I would call this spot with any ace, king 8 plus or something like that, you might need to start adjusting a few pips down for an opponent like Chinmay, right? So you kind of just take what the bottom of your calling range would be, whether or not it is GTO or not, just what in your normal day-to-day when you play, what you would be calling off with, and then just adjusting for the type of opponent that you're up against. So, if you see that Chinmay is just willing to go all in a lot more frequently, where card distribution shows that he's not likely to have that many hands that he's supposed to go all in with, then you might just need to be calling with a few more hands and adding in maybe some of the high card suited variety.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the interesting point here too is, of course, most of the play that we've seen among these players has been when there are more players at the table. There's more, hands that could have played, and so the um, how you interpret someone's play style when there are 7 or 8 or 9 players compared to how you evaluate their play style now, it's going to be hard. It's a new situation. So, of course, Jesse and Chinmay, as they have now played, 3 pots without any showdown, they don't know if the other player got aces 3 times, 3 hands in a row. They don't know if the other player has been bluffing. They don't know if they've been playing aggressive or passive. And so you really, I think, it gets down to this almost psychological game where you really have to, of course, make the best guess you can given the information you have previously, but it is quite tricky when you just don't get to know, right? Of course, you might get to know 10 or 15 or 30 or minutes in the future if you're able to kind of at that point look back at the stream and see what happened or have someone tell you. But in the moment right now, they have no idea if they've just been getting bad cards and their opponent's good cards, or if they've been getting bad cards and their opponent's been bluffing also with bad cards. Of course, Jessie here, she has not low 4-3 high, so to speak, on Queen 7 deuce, and she bets and gets Chinmay to fold, a pair. And so if you're in Chinmay's shoes, you look at that and you say, maybe she had a queen, maybe she didn't, but you just don't know. And so that lack of knowledge really is going to affect you, right? It's going to force you to make assumptions about what types of hands do I think my opponent is playing.
Yeah, and I think it's also, high time for Jessie to take advantage of kind of the table image she's built up throughout this final table, maybe playing a little bit tighter, but also not necessarily tighter pre-flop, but post-flop. You could tell that when she doesn't connect with the flop well, she does end up checking quite a bit. She doesn't necessarily take a lot of bluff spots, and she also doesn't like to, pay off the river without a pretty decent holding. And so now I think because people, especially Chinmay, who's her only opponent left, has seen that, I think it's time for Jessie to start betting more and activating these post flop bets that we haven't really seen her make. And just like when she had the nut low, when she had 4-3, and Chinmay actually had a piece with bottom pair with a pair of deuces, but he just very quickly folded because he hasn't seen that side of her yet. And so I think she can definitely capitalize and take advantage of it.
Yeah, exactly. It's been fun so far. I mean, we'll see. Of course, Chinmay here with a Jack 10 suited, a pretty hand, easy decision. Similarly, Jessie is going to have an easy decision on the other end, unless she decides to be a little bit fun, with a 7 deuce. But you have to think that when we are looking at a difference between a $5,000 payout and a $10,000 payout, you're going to want to stick to, good sound fundamentals and not get too out of line, even with, quote unquote, what might be your favorite hand. People often joke about, I like this hand or I like that hand. If I recall correctly from last year, I want to say that your favorite hand is aces, but you'll have to let me know if I'm wrong.
I feel like even if you didn't remember, you just had to guess. I feel like that's a pretty good guess. So yes, it is. I'm very boring, and I don't. Other people, they might go for the Jack 10 suited. They might go for the 7 deuce. But me, I just want the best starting hand. And if I don't win with it, that's okay. But it's still going to be my favorite hand because it gives me the best probability of winning.
Very sound logic. Very sound logic. And
What about
myself,
you?
I favor the Jack 9 of spades for some
Okay,
reason.
very specific on the suits then.
Very specific. I don't know if I'm sure there was a story from when I was playing 10 years ago, but at this point it just exists as it's a vague preference in my mind. But of course, if I was in Jesse or Chinmay's shoes right now, I'd much prefer pocket aces to that hand. But
Yeah.
at the same time, you have your proclivity, so to speak.
Well, I also feel like you're trying to go against the grain a little bit with your Jack 9 suited instead of like Jack 10. They can't just be right straight up connected. There has to be a one gapper. So
Yeah, maybe it says more about me than it does about the hand.
right. You're like, it really is Jack 10 suited, but because a lot of people pick Jack 10 suited, I'm just gonna say it's Jack 9.
Maybe something like that. It's fair. These two hands, you don't know what you're gonna get, but this could be a big clash. Of course, ace high when you're two players stands to be quite a good hand, and Jesse does raise it up, gets jammed on. Of course, Chinmay puts in the all in, and Jesse very quickly decides, you know what? From what I've seen, any ace is gonna be good enough, so she does call it off. And we see here, of course, Jesse has slightly more, so Chinmay is covered. Chinmay is all in and at risk with the king queen for all the marbles for a $10,000 pay jump. So far, so good for Jesse. No straight or flush help for Chinmay, but the queen on the turn does put him ahead. Of course, Jesse needs two pair. Does get there. What a run out. Well, we'll have to say thank you for the dealer for the sweat. Not sure Chinmay feels the same, but what a tournament. We'll have to hear the applause from up here from all the players who are in the room, and quite the finish. Chinmay and Jesse, they started off battling in some blind versus blind spots, and they end up as the final two with a quite memorable hand to end it all.
Yeah, definitely there was sweats for both players on that board, and I really love to see Jessie take it down. I think she's played a really good game, and I feel like she was patient when she needed to be patient. Of course, Chinmay finishing second, still a great result for him, and he honestly was the most exciting player to watch at the final table. So we are very lucky that we had someone like him here to really keep the action moving.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we had of course everyone participate and get in the action, and Chinmay maybe first and Jesse second in terms of their VPIPs and aggression previously, and unsurprisingly that leads them to finish first and second in the standings for nice take home payout of 10 and 5,000 respectively, which can't hurt when you're a college student.
No, I mean, definitely not. I think for both players, I mean, I don't even know what they're going to do for the rest of the day. I mean, they might just hang around and maybe start a side poker game right now.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think maybe if they finished atop the standings, they might decide to go out, get a nice dinner. Of course, Philly is known for having a pretty varied and I don't know, in my opinion, quite solid food scene. I'm not the biggest foodie, but even I can find and enjoy various establishments in the city, so wouldn't be surprised to do that. It's also a beautiful day, sunny day here. Temperatures in the high 60s, low 70s with sunshine, so maybe they'll go out with their friends, maybe explore the city. Of course, these players are from all over the country, so they might just take the opportunity to explore the area a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that today has just been a really great showcase of just, these people not only just having fun, but again, there's just so many similarities that we've been able to find between poker and trading. And so it's not a shock to me that naturally they all seem to be quite decent poker players. And I feel like they have a very bright future.
I certainly think so. I mean, we've seen the decisions they've made, and while you can always go back and say, oh, maybe we should have, weighted that, this thing higher in our minds before we made that decision, or maybe we should have weighted this other thing higher. Their decisions have been quite impressive. Like you said, we've done this tournament twice in a row, and I think the quality of play and the excitement around the tournament is just growing. So we'll have to congratulate Jesse and Chinmay and the rest of the players for their efforts. I think there are some pictures being taken, some big checks being written. So with that, I think we will also round out the coverage, and we'll also have to say thank you very much, Maria, for joining us and for talking about poker and trading and being here for the Susquehanna Showdown this 2026.
Yeah, I'm happy to be back, and it was nice to commentate with you again, Anders, and I can't wait for next time.